right, Eugene, can I get you to clap for the camera? What's up, everybody? It's Ben here, and I'm in an undisclosed location in Fort Worth, Texas. I'm here with Eugene Chan, pianist, software engineer, and creator of the popular comic strip, Don't Shoot the Pianist. And we're here to talk to you about some interesting, unusual, unconventional analytics about the Van Cliburn competition that Eugene's been processing. He's been crunching a lot of numbers here. We got a lot of data, we got some spreadsheets, and we're gonna tell you all about some numbers that we think are pretty insightful. Let's start by looking at big concerto choices over the last couple of decades. So can you tell us just about some stats on the most common concertos chosen by finalists?
Going back to 73 for a sec. 73, if you actually look at the program, is kind of interesting. Every single person picked the same finals concerto. I think it's because they were required to, to do it.
And which one was that?
That was Prokofiev Third. The rules aren't actually in that book. So in 73, everybody's got like a Beethoven concerto and Prokofiev Third.
Okay, so the rules have changed.
So the rules
have
changed, yes. In 77, there was a really large list of concertos you got to pick. It notably didn't include Rachmaninoff Third.
Interesting.
In 81 onwards, it was by then free choice in the final. And since then, Rachmaninoff Third has been picked 18 times. Gold medalists is a little bit closer. I think Rachmaninoff Third has won 4 times. And then the next one's probably Tchaikovsky First with 3. 2005 was actually the last time that there was no Rach 3 in the final. The thing about Rachmaninoff Third, since of course this has kind of become the Rachmaninoff Third competition, Cliburn of course played it himself at the Tchaikovsky. Rachmaninoff Third was picked by 4 finalists in 2001. It was actually heard 8 times. And the reason for that was a somewhat unorthodox stipulation in the rules. In the finals, it says each finalist performance will be repeated the next day. So that was kind of weird. Because, first of all, like this year and in the last few, if you play 2 concertos in the final, you play them on different days, right? In 2001, they actually played them on the same day. So you were paired with someone else. Like
you had a concert and you played your Mozart and your big one in the same concert.
Yeah, so if we were on the same day, I would play my Mozart, you would play your Mozart, I would play my Chairakiev, and you would play your Chairakiev.
And then the next day we do it all again.
And then the next day we would do it all again.
So it's almost like they're simulating a sort of weekend concert with a symphony, and they've got the Friday and the Saturday night performances.
Exactly.
That's really bizarre.
But it means that the jury and the public heard Rachmaninoff Third 8 times that year.
Wait, so that's so weird because we think of Olga Kern's winning Rach 3 performance, but which one is the one that we're referring to? Did she wear the same thing, that red dress, twice?
I don't know.
Where's the bit? I want to know more about this. Look it up and tell us in the comments. That's very unusual. Well, they got rid of that rule pretty quickly, although it's an interesting one. Next statistic, let's get away from repertoire. I want to talk about whether or not the time of a competitor's performance affects the results. So basically where you fall in a given round. Are you towards the beginning of the round or the end of the round? Do you play last? And also on a given day, because rounds are multiple days long, do you play more in the morning or more in the evening? I just want to point out that in this year, 2025, every single evening performer from both the preliminary rounds and the quarterfinals all advanced.
Yes.
So all evening performances that happened at Van Cliburn Recital Hall and TCU went on to the next round. And I'll also add one other fact, which is that in 2022, Eugene Chan, who went last in the prelims, and he, I think, drew maybe 5th or 6th in the draw party, and he was dead set on getting that last position, according to Jeff Detweiler.
He really wanted the last spot. That was his, he had told me before that he wants to play as late as possible. And he got the very last spot. So he was quite happy.
Can we make any other conclusions from the Cliburn over the past few decades about tendencies of jury results sort of favoring a given position in a round?
I think there is some sort of conventional wisdom that it is generally better to go later, either later in terms of day of performance or later in terms of time of day. There have been some attempts to actually study this a little more scientifically. If you look at a competition like the Queen Elizabeth competition, They have a very regular finals, COVID year accepted. They've always run a 6-day final and 2 people a day. And you do your entire final performance at once. And so there was actually a paper that came out in the mid-90s looking at all the finals from the Queen Elizabeth and their final rankings over the long history.
Century,
The long history of the Queen Elizabeth. And it would be interesting, what they had said in their conclusions is, we sort of see a trend, but it's not that strong a correlation yet because we don't have enough data. Now, there have been another 3 decades of Queen Elizabeth competitions since then, and it would be kind of interesting to actually go back because I can recall, like offhand, maybe like another 3 or 4 instances since. Of course, the plural of anecdote is not data. But I can recall a few instances where the person who has just gone last on the last day has just ended up winning the first prize. It does tend to happen, and it sticks in your mind when that happens.
Let's move on. We're coming back to repertoire data here. Now let's move to solo rep data. Just maybe a few observations about this year's solo choices among, I guess, all competitors' programs, or just what observations you made this year.
I think the big thing is that we have not heard and did not hear any original compositions by Franz Schubert. We had one instance of Schubert's name showing up in the program, and that was a transcription. And Vitaly Starikov played that.
Du bist die Ruhe. Well, so a moment of silence for the death of Schubert at the Cliburn in 2025.
Yeah.
So when was the last time that happened?
So the last time this happened was in 1989.
Okay, so we've had Schubert ever since then.
We've had Schubert in some solo recital.
I remember Roberto Plano's one of the A minor Schubert sonatas sticking out, Finals 2005. That was really beautiful. I don't know, is Schubert not a good competition composer? Maybe some might argue he's not. I mean, I don't know what you think, if you have any opinion on that.
I don't think it's that it doesn't do well. It takes a lot of time.
Takes up time.
You know, if you have a free choice 55-minute recital or 60-minute recital or however long that has varied over time, you might be taking 40 minutes with your Schubert.
Right. I mean, I could see if you play a heavenly Schubert B-flat sonata, putting that in the semifinals with something else, but then it's like, what else do you play to not tamper with that program? It would need to come before the Schubert. I mean,
this is like sort of like all-in bets in poker, right?
Yeah, I mean, you got to know that you own that, because spending 2/3 of your semis on a Schubert sonata is risky. But on the other hand, if you nail it and you take everyone's breath away, I mean, it could help you, especially if the rep you've played in other rounds was like very contrasting and showed a lot of other sides. But
then also the same conventional wisdom goes for the Brahms sonatas as well.
Right.
And I don't think we had...
You don't see a lot of...
Yeah, you occasionally see Brahms F minor.
Yeah.
I remember Clayton Stevenson played C major last time.
That's right.
I don't think we had any Brahms solo sonatas this year, right?
No, I don't remember seeing any. But also you might think, well, then wouldn't you like avoid the Hammerklavier? It's also, as long as the Schubert sonata. But there's a lot more going on in technically, and I would say the range of sound and expression in the Hammerklavier. You do hear a lot of Hammerklaviers. We heard 2 this year.
Yeah.
What sort of, I don't know, data do you have on the Hammerklavier?
Interestingly, up until maybe a few days ago, the Hammerklavier had never, lost. The Hammerklavier, people who played the Hammerklavier had never failed to advance.
They always advanced, right, until the semifinals this year. And some would argue that it should have held, but that's for you to discuss. Any other data on just any pieces, whether we heard them this year or not, that have done well over the years or less well in terms of advancing the given competitor who plays them?
A lot of the showpieces are actually doing a lot worse than you might expect. Mephisto Waltz is somewhere around 2 for 15.
There's a lot of bad Mephisto waltzes out there.
That's true. Islame, same deal. It's like 1 for 8 or so. Very interesting one that's might be relevant to some of our audience here is the Franck Prelude, Chorale, and Fugue. which has also not advanced in like 7 tries since 93.
Okay, there you have it. Prelude, Chorale, and Fugue. Not a good competition piece. Yeah, that's not too surprising. Maybe even Islam Mephisto Waltz is not too surprising. I generally don't hear good performances of those. The best pianists tend not to choose that rep for whatever reason. I don't know why.
And the other thing I think is also that you tend to play those pieces earlier on in a competition, and of course more people are getting eliminated earlier.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, so you're just going to hear more from the sort of larger pool of competitors.
Yeah, Hammer Clavier is a I'm going to put this in the semifinals kind of piece.
Right.
Or the quarterfinals in the case of Aristo.
Yeah, and I think if you're programming that, that's probably you probably are confident candidate.
Yes. You generally don't want to put that in the prelims. It's like, okay, here's the first time you're going to hear me. And it's like the Hammer Clavier, right? Nobuyuki Tsuji, who won in 2009, he had a semifinals performance, semifinal program that was largely oriented around the Hammer Clavier.
One thing I noticed this year, both full late Brahms sets that we got, Opus 116 and 118, let me editorialize a bit. Both beautifully played and some of the most intriguing playing of those works I've ever heard, certainly live. Neither advanced, and that was Krukuli's 116 and Jonas Almüller's 118. So what does that mean about late Brahms? Is this the death of late Brahms at the Cliburn? We're going to hear no Brahms next time? I don't know, but I thought those should have been respected and valued a bit more.
I honestly think late Brahms is a smart competition choice. You know, it does showcase a certain like depth that you don't always get with your other showpieces.
Right, I'm just wondering how we're supposed to play it, if it's going to advance. Because if it wasn't like those two, I don't know how much better you can do. Of course, the most often programmed work this year is Gaspard de la Nuit. I think we heard 5, and there were 6 total chosen by the 28. What do you know about the data on Gaspard? Does it do well?
Gaspard is played a lot. It does fairly successfully. It was done, I think it advanced 12 times in the last maybe 3 decades out of 18. And then there were a few times where it was played as a final round recital because for a couple of years the Cliburn actually had a final round recital. And they would make you play that 60-minute recital along with 2 concertos.
Right. Yeah, that was up until which year?
That was 2005 and 2009.
Right. I remember that, yeah.
And because of the way the scheduling works, some poor soul was guaranteed to have to play a concerto on 2 concertos and a recital on 3 consecutive days.
Maybe it's getting a little much. It's been a little much for a while.
But yes, this competition I think has always had the reputation of the one that sort of beats you up, pummels you. And then checks to see whether you still have a pulse at the end, to stand up, and whoever is the last to sort of drop dead in a metaphorical sense is crowned a medalist or the winner,
It is largely an endurance test
absolutely,
or a sort of Roman arena, whichever, however you want to think of it. Moving away from repertoire, let's talk about some demographic observations. I just wanted to begin by saying there were more women on the jury this year, 5, than there were women competitors who performed, 4. There were 5 who got in, but then 1 dropped out. So I didn't check, but I'm guessing this is the only time women jury members outnumbered women competitors. But what do you make of just like the breakdown, or what do you observe in the breakdown of gender over this in this particular competition?
I mean, that's not really my observation when I went to school, for example. There were plenty of women in school.
Yeah, for sure.
It's just, for some reason, happens to be at the top level. It's kind of something that should be at least thought about.
Yeah, we should talk about it. I mean, it's at least worth going back and just looking at the breakdown of who applied.
Yes.
So this year, 251 men applied, only 89 women applied. Cliburn doesn't really control who's applying from that larger world of conservatory trained pianists. So that's 74% men just applying in the first place. Then you do see the proportions skew a little bit more men as things get more selective. So after the audition round, 75% were men. That's roughly the same as the applications. But then into the main competition, we had 25 out of 30. That's 83%, 5 out of 6. Same thing into the quarters, 5 out of 6. And same thing going into the semifinals, 5 out of 6 were men, 10 out of 12. But the proportions go down, and then in the finals it's 6-0, so it's 100%.
Yeah, of course you're getting into the area of low sample
Low sample
size
sizes,
at a certain point, because if like one more person, if one more woman had made it into the main competition, you'd be looking at 75% again, and it would exactly.
Yeah, exactly.
Be the
So
same,
those percentages sort of jump back and forth.
They're very, very coarse-grained at that point.
We do see just in general the outnumbering begins with the actual application.
Yes.
I think that must point to something related just to the sociology of those who try to compete in the biggest competitions of the world. What does it say about young men versus young women in their 20s? What kind of obsessive, fanatic, sort of dedication to the physical extremes of practicing, the time demands of practicing, that seems to select more for men. I think there's probably other fields outside of music even where you see similar selection for a certain kind of obsessive, fanatical, singular drive towards a given goal. It's not to say women can't do it, just for whatever sociological or political or whatever reasons biological that you might want to speculate about. There might be some studies, but I just wanted to raise that question without offering any particular judgments or opinions about it, because I don't know. It's just there it is. But
and I think another thing to point out is that this tends to happen in piano specifically. Like you don't have this conversation in international violin competitions.
Mm-hmm.
There was one year in the Queen Elizabeth where I think South Korea sent 20 people to the violin competition for Queen Elizabeth, and 19 of them were women. But it's kind of clear from the data in terms of who is applying that this starts even before like some competition jury is actually looking at this. It's not that juries are favoring men.
Right.
Or anything like that. There's some sort of self-selection going on even before you get to the application stage.
Yeah, and been pointing out that there's more women jury members than women competitors. Just because you're a woman jury member doesn't necessarily mean you're going to favor women competitors. You can make the argument that the opposite is the case there as well. I'll just put that out there. So otherwise, demographically speaking, of course, we see the most competitors represented from China. I mean, one reason is, what is it, like 1.4 billion people or 1.5 billion at this point?
It's in the billions.
Yeah, so I mean, we just start with the fact that like 15% of the world's population is Chinese. But also, obviously, there's the culture there for just training young musicians. So you're just going to give a much bigger pool to choose from. But we don't need to speculate about that so much. But you also saw, 102 out of the 340 that applied, so a little less than 1/3 were from China, and then you see 44 United States, 38 South Korea, 20 from Italy, and then there's 45 countries and regions total. So a lot of from other areas. Any observations about that?
I thought it was just an interesting, silly stat that I noticed when I was looking at this list, that this is the first Cliburn since 1997 where every competitor has a different last name. 2 Lius in 22, that would be Kate and Sliu. There were 3 Kims in 2017, 2 Lins in 2013, 2 Zhangs in 2009, one of them won. And then 2 Chens in 2005, and 2001 there were 2 Parks. So it's been a different name every time that's been duplicated.
That's interesting. Yeah.
We have a Chen and a Cheng this year.
Yeah, but no overlap.
Yeah, no overlap. I mean, Johnson's a very common Anglo-Saxon name. There's only one of those.
This has to be the first Johnson in the finals. I mean,
I think it is.
And absolutely the first Carter, I would say, first name. I'm not even going to go do the. I'm not even going to go in and do the research. I'm going to just say it now without any research to substantiate this. It's got to be the first Carter.
For a stats
first Carter finalist of all time in any piano competition internationally.
Yeah,
except for Carter Johnson.
Exactly.
When he makes the finals. But.
Yeah. For a stats nerd like me, sometimes I was at one point in the habit of looking at the names on baby name statistics that the Social Security Administration puts out. Of course, that's only in the United States, but you can see like how popular a name has been over like the last 100 years or so. And Eugene, unfortunately, peaked in the 20s,
Eugene,
the 1920s.
You're a dying breed.
I know.
You don't go by Gene, though.
No, I
There were
don't.
lots of genes
Yes.
in the 20th century, some great genes.
I'm pretty sure Ben is perennially popular.
Ben is, remember those Freakonomics stats? I remember once, 20 years ago, I was reading a book, and it said Benjamin
Yes.
was the most popular name at a given time among wealthy, opulent people.
Oh, really?
And I was like, man, I'm middle class, bro.
Gotta live up to that.
I'm Ben, you know. I am the Benjamin, you know, with a silver spoon in my mouth. No, but anyway, yeah, I need to live up to it a little more.
Or Benjamin as a middle name.
Oh yeah,
Yeah.
that
That
seems-
happens too.
That also seems very
Aristocratic.
aristocratic.
Yeah.
We also have an Aristo.
Yes, we do.
This year, got to be the first Aristos. Some really original names. I mean, Everin, Aristo, Carter. Okay, David is maybe a little less uncommon,
conventional.
but yes. Anyway, all right, man.
Yes.
You gonna bring the cartoons back?
I think I've got some ideas.
I've got sheets of paper with Eugene's famous handwriting on it that I'm treasuring, and will, you know, find a place on my wall, I think, at some point. So if you haven't looked up Don't Shoot the Pianist, go straight to the website right now and, you know, start with his Opus 1, and then you can just make your way through. They're very fun. Okay, Eugene.
It's been a pleasure.
Off to the finals tonight.
Absolutely.